Hi, fourth graders. I'm glad you're here because today I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Are you ready for it? Shh. I, Miss Kipling, love science. What? That's not a good secret? You're saying everybody knows that already. Well, okay, now you know too. So when you love science, you also love to talk to other people who love science. So today I'm going to share with you a book that was written by one of my favorite scientists. His name is Dr. Xargle. He's a teacher too, good friend of mine. We go way back. And he likes to do research and then write books about the things that he's learned. So without further ado, let's get started. Dr. Xargle's book of Earthlets. Now you can see my friend Dr. Xargle's on the cover here. And I already told you he's a scientist. I already told you he's a teacher. He's my friend. But is there any other information that you might gather from the illustration on the front page, on the front cover about Dr. Xargle? You say you don't think he's from Earth? Well, I would say you're right. He is not indeed from Earth. But he likes to study about things on Earth. So what do you think an Earthlet is? You might be able to tell by the book he's carrying, but let's just read the book and find out. Dr. Xargle's Book of Earthlets. Good morning, class. Today we are going to learn about Earthlets. They come in many colors, but not green. They have one head and only two eyes, two short tentacles with feelers on the end, and two long tentacles called leggies. They have square claws which they use to frighten off wild beasts known as tibbles and Marmaduke. Earthlets grow fur on their heads, but not enough to keep them warm. They must be wrapped in the hairdo of a sheep. Very old earthlings, or grannies, unravel the sheep, and with two pointed sticks they make earthlet wrappers in blue and white and pink. Earthlets have no fangs at birth. For many days they drink only milk through a hole in their face. When they have finished the milk, they must be patted and squeezed to stop them from exploding. Very important. When they grow a fang, the parent earthling takes the egg of a hen and mangles it with a prong. Then she puts the egg mangle on a small spade and tips it into the earthlet's mouth, nose, and ears. To stop them leaking, earthlets must be pulled up by the back tentacles and folded in half. Then they must be wrapped quickly in a fluffy triangle or sealed with paper and glue. During the day, earthlets collect the hairs of tibbles and Marmaduke, mud, egg mangle, and banana. They are placed in plastic capsules with warm water and a yellow floating bird. After soaking, earthlets must be dried carefully to stop them from shrinking. Then they are sprinkled with dust to stop them from sticking to things. Earthlets can be recognized by their fierce cry. Wah! To stop them from doing this, the earthling daddy picks them up and flings them into the atmosphere. Then he tries to catch them. If they still cry, the earthling mummy pulls their feelers one by one and says, "This little piggy went to market," until the earthlet makes a hee-hee noise. If they still cry, they are sent to a place called Betty Buys. This is a swinging box with a soft lining in which there lives a small bear called Teddy. That is the end of today's lesson. If you are all very good and quiet, we are going to put on our disguises and visit planet Earth to see some real Earthlets. The spaceship leaves in 5 minutes. right, so what did you think of my friend and colleague, Dr. Xargle's book? What? You're saying it wasn't very scientific at all? Well, I would say that Dr. Xargle is good at certain things, but maybe needs to practice some other things. He's really good at making observations. Do you know what an observation is? An observation is anything that you can tell us, any information that you can give us based on your five senses. So things that you see or hear or smell or taste or touch, anything that you can tell us using your five senses is an observation. So for example, Miss Kibling's headband is yellow. That's something that I can see. I can prove it just by looking at it with my eyes. But the trouble is when Dr. Xargle makes these really awesome observations about Earthlets, he sometimes comes to some conclusions that are maybe not quite right. And those conclusions are called inferences. So when you make an observation, you do this when you're reading, you do this when you're living your life, you do this a lot in science. You are using one or more of your five senses to find out about an object or events. Now, when you make what's called an inference, that means you're taking any information that you get by observing and combining that information with stuff you already know. So if you said that Earthlets were babies, of course, you are correct. That's right. And how many of you have ever met a baby? How many of you have ever been a baby? So you know a little bit about babies just by living here on Earth. And just because you have experience with babies, you know that Dr. Xargle, who doesn't, made some pretty iffy inferences about what Earthlets, why Earthlets do the things that they do. So let's talk about an example. Here's one illustration. This one's one of my favorites. Poor Tibbles and Marmaduke. And I want you to tell me what is an observation and what is an inference. So let's practice. They have square claws, which they use to frighten off wild beasts known as Tibbles and Marmaduke. All right, so Dr. Xargle makes an observation on this page. And the observation is something that he can prove just by looking at it or hearing it or smelling it or using any of his five senses. So what is that? I think his observation on this page is that the Earthlets have square claws. Now, we don't necessarily call them claws, but they are squarish, right? So he's observing with his eyes, his many, many eyes, that Earthlets or babies have square claws, right? Now, he draws a conclusion or makes an inference about those square claws that isn't quite right. It's a good try. And he says that the Earthlets use those square claws to frighten off wild beasts known as Tibbles and Marmaduke. Now we know that babies don't scare off house cats using their square claws. I mean, they might accidentally, but they're not intentionally trying to frighten them off with their fingernails. So sure, that inference might have made sense to Dr. Xargle, but because he doesn't know anything about babies other than what he's observed, he's never spent any time with babies, his inference is not quite right. So after you watch this video, you'll go to the next slide on your assignments and I'll give you some instructions on how to do your assignment today. And you'll be practicing distinguishing between observations and inferences that you found in this book. And don't forget to check out the last slide of the presentation that was shared with you today, because there are 3 other books by Dr. Xargle that you can check out. And maybe you have some advice for him about making better inferences. All right, hope you enjoyed this, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.